Hey there.
Morning.
So it is an exciting time in music right now, but it's also kind of a scary time. You know, all these big platforms like Apple and Google are getting really serious about streaming. You've got unicorns like Spotify is pouring more and more money into it. So my big question is, what differentiates Pandora right now?
It's funny, it may sound kind of mundane, but it's great playlists. I think that people have underestimated for a long, long time and continue to how hard it is to create an effortless listening experience that plays music for someone that they love and helps them discover things they don't know. And it actually takes a huge investment, a technical investment, a product investment, and also a massive amount of data, which Pandora now, the way we create playlists is a combination of musicological analysis and an enormous amount of data. It's actually wickedly hard to do that.
So my question really is that, to me, radio was never what listening was supposed to be. It was kind of just a forced function of the way that old school technology worked, where the AM and FM dials required you to just send out one set of music to people. When people hear a great song, don't they want to hear it again?
Yeah, it's another interesting, there's a big misconception, I think, about the way music is consumed. And radio has historically been the lion's share of the time people spend with music. It's actually still true today. So if you look at the average American, 17-ish hours a week of music, still 80% of that is radio, sort of a lean-back listening. And I think it's partly because music listening is something that you tend to do while you're doing something else. You don't tend to want to administer, sort of lean in and spend time curating your experience. You like to hit a button and be entertained. But I think what you're saying is very true, that there's something unnatural about having to all subscribe to the same single playlist. And I think the great invention, the modern invention with the web, is the ability to unicast it, to cater and personalize your experience listener by listener. And that's going to transform this business completely.
Okay, I totally disagree with you. When I hear a great song, I want to hear it again. I do want to click a different button, and I want to hear that song again. That's like the concept of an earworm, the concept of a hit song. People want to hear things that they love again and again. And you can't do that on Pandora. Isn't that a big limiting factor for the service?
Absolutely, people want to do that. Data will say they do want to do that for 1 out of every 5 hours. They want to actually go in and hear something over and over again, curated very sort of particularly. But in the long run, and this is when we think about our own business, we're looking at what is the habit? What is the sort of mass consumption form? Because that's the big opportunity. It's also the pipeline through which music is actually discovered. And if we want to make an impact on the industry, that's where we're going to go. So you're right that right now we can't cater to that rewind button on Pandora you're looking for. Are we thinking about it? Absolutely. Is there a way we could marry that into the radio product? Something we think about every day. But what you're saying, the sort of use case you're describing is still the minority.
Wait, so you guys are thinking about how to get into on-demand?
Well, we've thought about that for years and years. I mean, I think that when we feel like the economics make sense, when it makes sense for us in our business, we've been at this 15 years now. And our focus has been singularly on creating great playlists and how do you monetize that. Two really big building blocks, very hard to do. Now we have 80 million people a month coming. We're 10% of all radio listening in the United States right now. So we've got a great foundation. And we're sitting on really the mother of all marketing platforms for musicians. So what do we do now? It's kind of a big new era for us.
Is that something you guys can just build based on the existing situation you have with your licenses and technology, or would you need something? Would you need other tools?
Yeah, so we need to be directly licensed. So the statutory license we operate under right now is for a radio-like experience. So if we want to go to something more interactive that allows on-demand listening, we have to go and create a completely new set of licenses. They're out there to be had, but we do need a new set of licenses.
Would you ever consider buying those licenses, acquiring those licenses?
I think the logical approach is to license it from, there's a relatively small number of entities under which the major labels under which it's kind of aggregated. So we'd start with that. It's also the key for us going international.
What about something like RDO? I mean, it seems like they're just dead in the water to me. Would you ever just buy them up and just take their on-demand licenses and run with those?
Well, when we do go into this space, we'll consider all the options and balance the need for speed with do we want to do it ourselves in our own way? Kind of all the logical things you consider when you want to go into that, but no established path yet.
So Pandora's bread and butter has always been this algorithmic upvote, downvote radio system. But over the last few years, we've seen a bunch of other services build very similar features. Spotify has a radio feature like that. Apple has a radio feature like that. If I were to set up 3 sets of headphones right now and give you a blind listening test, would you be able to tell which one was Pandora?
That's a good question. And the many companies that offer a sort of personalized experience have been arguing for years about what's the right way. And ultimately, there's only one way to measure that, which is in the listening, in the data. Like, what are listeners telling us? And we just passed our 10-year anniversary, and our listenership continues to grow, not just in raw numbers, but in the number of hours per month that people listen to it. So even with all these new alternatives that are taking different approaches, we continue to see sort of robust growth in listening, which tells us, could I tell the difference in 1 hour between 3 different products? Maybe not. But over time, clearly people prefer what Pandora does. And I will say, you use the word algorithmic, and that's a word that's often used to describe us. And I think it's important to know there are really 2 ingredients. There's a big part, the foundation of Pandora is this music genome project. That's a hand-built database. So we literally have musicians at Pandora, about 40 of them now. That team has been as big as 100, who spend their days with headphones on, listening to songs and manually measuring them, describing them along as many as 450 attributes per song. So it's a really human manual process that then gets married to math and thumbing and so the data part. So it's a hybrid.
Yeah, but to me, the question really is, like, if I'm already going to pay for a streaming service, if I get one with no ads and algorithmic radio, you're talking about this mainstream audience, right? Mm-hmm. To the mainstream, let's be honest, people don't have great taste. Most people's music taste sucks. And so they're just not going to be able to really tell. I don't think that they would be able to even know the difference, really, between all the amazing hand-picked stuff that went into your algorithm and the way that these other services work. So, how do you make sure that you stay a step ahead if all these other people are bundling in a good enough version of what you do?
So I guess I'd say a couple of things. One, I think you underestimate how much people care and discern the songs that are played. I mean, if you consider the average radio listenership, think of yourself, any of us here, you are completely unforgiving of a radio station playing the wrong song. If you're in your car and it's the wrong song, you're gone immediately. Same is true online. And I do think that, Apple launched a radio product a year and a half ago, iTunes Radio. It was delivered to an enormous iOS audience right up against Pandora. We saw virtually no impact, kept right on our same growth path. I think that's pretty proof positive that people do discern the difference and recognize that one's better.
It's pretty damning for Apple that they launched this massive radio feature and it had essentially no impact on your growth.
Well, I think it's radio on the surface as a consumer, it looks kind of easy. You type in a song or an artist and it plays stuff like that. It can seem easy, but it's actually fantastically hard. And the advantage Pandora has is we have north of 1,800 employees now. All they think about all day long is this one thing. How do you perfect this effortless lean-back experience? And to get that right has taken us thousands of people and a decade and a half. So it's not an easy thing to do.
All right, so I've been throwing some shade at you guys for the last few minutes. Let's see what you think about these other services.
Okay.
So tell me, what's the fate of Soundcloud?
Well, look, I think if you want to be in this business in the long term, there are 3 things you have to reckon with. One, you have to build a service that's got mass appeal. You've got to have a big audience for it. The second is you have to build a real business. So you have to generate meaningful revenue. It has to be a legit business. And the third, last but not least, you have to be legally licensed. And you have to pay a fair share of the money you generate back to the creative community. You have to do all 3 of those things. You can't do 1 or 2. You've got to do all 3. I think there are very, very few companies, I think we're one of them, that's doing all 3. If you don't, you will eventually have your day of reckoning. And it might be on the licensing side, it might be on the business side, or you might not get consumer adoption. So,
all right, so which of those are SoundCloud missing?
well, licensing is the big empty spot right now. So the question is, can they get over that hump?
I mean, to me, they're also not really making enough money, and they're pissing people off so much with the way they're taking down music that they're losing their user base. So I feel like they're basically doing 0 of the 3 right now. So I'm pretty worried about them.
Well, I mean, the great challenge when you offer a music service is how do you give your listeners something they will love, but build a business on it that won't turn them away? And on top of that, how do you create a business that has the kind of productivity that you can create good value for the creative community? Because if you don't do that, the creative community will walk away from you, and you can't build a business without them.
All right, so we're only 1 week away from the free trials of Apple Music starting to expire. How do you think that that's going to work out for them? Similar to iTunes Radio, which obviously didn't go super well?
Well, our theory about subscription is that it's a small market in terms of the total number of people that are willing to pay a large amount of money, these $10, $15 a month subscriptions. So we think that is a limited market, and the real win is how do you cater to the 80, 90% of people that don't want to pay something. So I think they will have the same challenges everybody else has. But in the long run, these prices will vary. We'll find midpoints. We'll find a way to cater to the kind of what everybody likes. But it's going to be you're fighting over a small pie in that world, I think.
I can't even really tell if Google cares about Google Music. It's like, it's up for debate, I feel like. What do you think? Do you think that they're really in it to win it, or are they just sort of like, this seems like something we should offer?
Well, I think one thing we've learned as a company, and myself as an entrepreneur all these 15 years, surviving when we shouldn't have really, is what sets smaller companies apart and allows them to actually compete against behemoths like those is focus, and the fact that you are only doing one thing, whether you're doing what we're doing, personalized radio, or you're making just grilled cheese sandwiches. If your company is perfecting one thing, turns out you can compete really effectively with maybe a much more well-resourced business, because in their whole portfolio of things that they do, this one just isn't that important. And so you're actually not competing with the whole thing, you're competing with that part of the company.
Heaven knows we have a lot of grilled cheese sandwich restaurants in San Francisco, so apparently that is a working strategy. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about royalties. It seems like everyone just loses their shit about royalties all the time. Everyone is pissed about it. Every artist I talk to is like furious about how much they're getting paid by you guys, by Spotify, by everyone. The question to me isn't, are the royalties high enough, but is that even what they should be focusing on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the first thing I'll say is this. I mean, for starters, historically, radio has not paid performers anything. A lot of people don't know that. They paid the composer about 3.5% of royalties, but AM/FM radio has generated close to $1 trillion in the last 50 years and has not paid a red cent to the actual performers. Internet radio pays about 50% of its revenue, and that's Pandora's case. It'll be north of $500 million this year. So broadly speaking, every hour that moves from AM/FM to the web, internet radio, is a huge economic plus for the industry. And I think that all by itself should make them a huge fan of this category. But on top of that, and maybe even more importantly, one of the huge differences between broadcast radio and connected radio like ours is you have a connection to the listener. So if I look over the next 10, 20, 30 years, what I think is going to really revolutionize the business, it's not just the royalties so much. It's the fact that if you're an average band on Pandora with 400,000 listeners that have thumbed up your music, you'll have the ability to actually interact with them and to do it in a targeted way and turn those fans into patrons. And we're actually starting to do that. And I think as the industry witnesses this, they're going to recognize that it's a new era. I mean, it's a very different business we're going into, and it's a really healthy one.
Are you guys going to equip artists with any additional tools for things like that, like a digital tip jar?
Yeah, so I think you start with two things on the service. You start with massive scale, so 80 million plus a month. And then you add to that the knowledge of each listener's taste. So we know what a big part of America likes. We also have a sense of location, right now zip code through registration. And we have the means of communicating with them. So we are already now piloting and doing programs where we actually have put the power of that in the hands of a musician. Take, for example, Odessa, emerging EDM band, getting no airtime on broadcast radio, but doing well on Pandora. So they took a North American tour, gave us 12 dates, and gave us a chunk of tickets for each event. And then we had the band record some small audio snippets, and we delivered targeted pre-sale alerts, market by market, within a constrained DMA, to listeners in those markets as they were listening to a radio station playing Odessa's music, announcing the local show with the call to action to buy the ticket. We were selling out shows in minutes. In fact, they added, I think, 3 shows in New York City alone because they would give us an allocation, we'd sell it out, they'd give us another one, we'd sell that out too. And we're talking about a band that's not some big mainstream band. We're talking about an average working band, and there are thousands of those on the service.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just seems crazy. It's like there's this massive way for tons of people to listen to your music, and everyone talks about buying music, but it's like, I'm not going to buy your music if I don't know who you are, and I'm certainly not going to go to your show and buy your T-shirt if I've only heard like one of your songs, or if you force me to pay $15 up front to buy your album before I know who you are, I'm just not going to do that. So to me, I think artists really need to figure it out that the way to get rich, the way to really make money is to get famous, and the way to get famous is to get fans, and you get that through streaming. And so how do you convince artists that that's the strategy?
And this is why I started the company. When I was in a band, our marketing was go to Kinko's, print off a box full of 8.5 by 11s, grab a staple gun, and put on fucking telephone poles. That's what we did in bands. This is a new era. The amount of data and what an artist can do with it now is just shifting this business entirely. The idea of a working musician will no longer be an oxymoron. I mean, we're going to enter an era where you're going to have this large class of artists that were marginal, that are going to actually have sustainable, enduring careers, and that's the ambition of the company.
Yeah, I just think artists need to stop thinking about streaming services as stealing their music and giving it away, and instead those streaming services are like their street team out there flyering for them.
Yeah, I think the economics need to make sense, but on top of that, what you're saying is absolutely right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for talking with me.
Yeah, you bet.
Cheers.
Thank you. All right.